So obviously when the Crown Prosecution Service made their decision to take the prosecution forward, it was based on the evidence that they had at the time. We as a government are incredibly disappointed that it has been dropped. That wasn't the outcome that we wanted. But of course, it was based on the evidence that they had at the time. And what we've seen since is that a change in case law has meant that the evidence threshold now hasn't been met. And ultimately, that's the reason the case got dropped.
Right, so there is disappointment in the case being dropped. Will it be brought again?
Well, because as I say, because it's based on the evidence that there was at the time. So this happened in 2023, so
yes.
It was under the previous government. So they got together their evidence base. And that is what it has to be based on. You can't retrospectively go back and change what the evidence was at that time in 2023. And as I say now, and the letter from the Director of Public Prosecution sort of showed this, because there'd been a case in the High Court recently that meant that now, as I say, the evidence bar has been changed, and that's why it's been dropped.
Well, it's the evidence bar that's changed. It's not the evidence itself. The evidence was there. The evidence was still the same. Nothing had changed in the way that these guys were being prosecuted. It's the fact that you guys decided, or the CPS decided to drop it. Did they drop it because of pressure?
No, absolutely not.
Is there a fear about calling China an enemy?
No, absolutely not. And I'm pleased to be able to come on here and put that straight, because I've seen that flying around social media. So no, absolutely not. It is simply because, and as I say, the letter from the Director of Public Prosecution shows this, that where there was a case in the High Court that meant that the evidence bar changed, and that meant that it didn't meet it. And the Prime Minister explained this yesterday, and, you know, he knows a lot about his former job, so he knows all about it. And as he was explaining, that you can't retrospectively go back and change what the evidence was from the time. Unfortunately, it's not been met. But as a government, we are disappointed.
But he also knows how to explain things as a lawyer, and as you know, you have 2 or 3 different lawyers, you might get 2 or 3 different opinions on things. On the decision to drop it, there is reporting that it came as a result of pressure. You're saying that's not, but we know that the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, has been to China many times in recent years. The Telegraph are suggesting that it was because of him, that he was responsible for this.
Absolutely not. Nothing to do with him, nothing to do with ministers whatsoever. That is completely false.
Is China an enemy?
China is a challenge, and China is a country in which we have a large trading relationship with, and sometimes we'll be competing with China, sometimes we'll be collaborating with China, and sometimes we need to challenge China when it makes decisions that we don't think are in interest. But ultimately, this government acts in the national interest.
So they're not an enemy. I know that we define them, we call them an epoch-defining and systemic challenge. I mean, that's the language that was used. You know, at the time when that language was used, people wanted to describe them as a threat. We're not going to do that. We're going to keep calling them a challenge rather than a threat, are we?
We are, but obviously, as you can imagine, as a responsible government, we're constantly re-evaluating our relationship with every single country. But at the moment, our consideration is that China is a challenge.
Our last point on this, the former chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Cairns, says that Labour has crippled prosecutors to appease Beijing. You're pulling your face already. Let me finish what she says. To appease Beijing, and the UK is less safe.
I have huge respect for her, actually. You know, with different political parties, but I have huge respect for her. But on this opinion, I fundamentally disagree with her. You
don't think the UK is less safe by this decision to drop prosecution against 2 men who were alleged of spying?
Well, as I said, the government's disappointed that it hasn't gone forward. It's not the outcome that we wanted. But what I want to be really clear is this is not a decision made by the government. This is not a government decision. This is a decision made by the Crime Prosecution Service based on a change on the evidence threshold that is based on a case that came in the High Court. This is not a government decision and has had no government influence.
Would the government want the charges to be brought again?
You can't retrospectively go back. As I said, it's based on the evidence from 2023. You can't make new evidence back up from 2023.
It's the same evidence. I mean, you're saying you could bring the charges again, could you not?
The evidence threshold is not going to change. You could bring the case again, and the Crown Prosecution Service would say, well, you've brought the same thing back, and it still hasn't met the threshold.
If they change that decision. OK, let's move on to a conversation I had actually yesterday, not around this time, but a little later in the morning, with the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, who described Handsworth as not being integrated because he didn't see any white faces there. Do you recognise that description of the suburb?
I thought, do you know what? I thought the idea that he can rock up to a community he knows nothing about, spend an hour and a half there, and obviously take someone to film him with their iPhone, and make a judgment on that community without really speaking to anybody, without getting to know it, I think is incredibly divisive and unhelpful. I don't think Britishness is based on the colour of somebody's skin. And I think these are the kind of comments that create problems within different communities. And what we should be doing is seeking to bring people together. I mean, the Prime Minister in his speech, excuse me, just the previous week, was talking about unity, was talking about, coming together as a country, was talking about what are the great things about our country and how we bring different talents. And I think that's where we should be having our conversation, not around sort of divisive comments made by a wannabe Tory leader.
His point is that he feels like this has been a conversation that has been had by people on both sides of the political spectrum about integration and about Britishness, I guess you could term it. Does he have a point in that at all, do you think? Do you think that we're a fully integrated society?
I think as I say, he makes this judgment based on spending an hour and a half in a community. I don't think anybody should go to any community, rock up with their iPhone and make a judgment on that community based on spending such little time there. What does he know about how well integrated that community is or isn't? But, I think as a bigger point, I do think as a country we've seen incredible divisiveness, we've seen divisive language, and I think the more we can as a country to try and come together, try and work together. I go back to the comments of my former colleague Jo Cox, we have more in common than that which divides us, and I think if we can try and seek to find those positions of unity and working with each other, then that's all the better, and the less unhelpful divisive comments, I think, are not making that situation easier.
Move on to something within your brief then, flooding and waterways. What does the government make of this decision, this huge class action that's being taken through the courts to sue water companies for pollution?
So with the River Wear, so we announced last year we're putting £1 million project into the River Wear to do some research on all the different sources of pollution that are going into them and what can be done basically to mitigate them. And that was a joint project we've done with the Welsh Government, because obviously the previous government's River Wye plan didn't include Wales, which is slightly odd if you look at where the River Wye actually goes. And so we've done this research project to look at this issue, but I completely understand the level of anger that there is in all of our communities about the amount of pollution. We've got the most ambitious target ever to reduce sewage pollution by half. We've introduced the bonus ban for polluting water bosses. We've introduced criminal liability for a Water Special Measures Act. And we've just done the Water Commission, which was the biggest ever look at the privatisation of the water system, and we've got even more legislation to come in the response to the White Paper in November.
So you're happy for the companies to be sued in this case then for the pollution?
I think, as citizens of this country, everybody has a right to take legal action. I mean, it's one of our democratic rights, and it's not for a government to say you should or you shouldn't. OK. Voting's opened in the deputy leadership election. Are you going to tell us who you're going to vote for? Yeah, I am.
Why?
Yes, happy to. So I think they're both fab, genuinely. They're both wonderful Northern women. And so I'm sort of delighted by both of them, so very happy either way. But I've gone with Lucy Powell, and that's partly because we spent 2 years together on the Education Select Committee. So when I was first elected in 2017 up until 2019 in that first Parliament, because I was a former teacher, I was on the Education Select Committee and sat next to Lucy throughout that time. So when she asked me to nominate her, I was like, yeah, I will do. But I think they're both fabulous. And I think what Bridget's done on free school meals is great. And
you want to see the two-child benefit cap lifted, I imagine, come the...
I think there's different ways to tackle child poverty. Genuinely and honestly, I think there are lots of different ways to come about this, and I trust that the Child Poverty Task Force will come up with the best ways possible.
Emma Hardy, thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.